It's hard to imagine how this blue Indian man could be mistaken for Jesus, or a deer for that matter. The only similarity we have here is an ascension, which is not even mentioned in Zeitgeist. Even if you do want to take Zeitgeist's premise that the ascension account might have been borrowed, then who borrowed from who? The earliest testimony for the complete text of the Mahabharata dates to the 1st century AD by the Greek sophist Dion Chrysostom. The available accounts of Dionysus' birth indicate that Dionysus was not born of a virgin. In the best-known myth, Dionysus was born through an affair between Zeus and a princess. In another version, Zeus mated with his daughter Persephone and she bore Dionysus. Dr. Edwin Yamauchi, professor of history at Miami University, confirms there is no evidence of a virgin birth for Dionysus. As the story goes, Zeus, disguised as a human, fell in love with the princess Semele, the daughter of Cadmus, and she became pregnant. Also, not only is December 25th irrelevant to Jesus' birth, there is also no reference to Dionysus being born on December 25th in any scholarly literature. Even some of Zeitgeist's sources, Timothy Freak and Peter Gandy, note that Dionysus' birth was celebrated on January 6th by some in Alexandria, which makes it of no relevance for copycat claims. Indeed, Dionysus was a traveling teacher. At any rate, this is a vague similarity that could be found in most ancient and modern literature concerning any figure with a message to share with others. But there are differences as well. Dionysus wandered the world accompanied with wild women, flushed with wine, shoulders draped with a fawn skin, whereas Jesus traveled the limited area surrounding Jerusalem, providing moral teachings. Though there are accounts of Dionysus filling empty vessels with wine, there is no reference to Dionysus turning water into wine, as Zeitgeist claimed. And it is not surprising that Dionysus performed miracles involving wine, since he was the god of wine. One historical study explains, the ancient literature says that there was a spring with clear, sparkling, wine-colored water, very pleasant-tasting water in which the newly born Dionysus was bathed. Also, a spring in the temple flowed with wine. At Elis, the priests of Dionysus placed 3 large empty cauldrons in a sealed room to find them filled with wine when they returned the next day. However, from these references it is obvious that there are significant differences between the Dionysus legend and the story in John 2. The spring flowed with water, and the one at Andros flowed with wine, not wine that had once been water. And the empty cauldrons in the Elis temple were filled with wine rather than water subsequently changed into wine. Key elements in John's story. These differences have convinced most scholars that John or his tradition is not dependent on the Dionysus legend for this story. Research professor Dr. Donald A. Carson wrote, older attempts to interpret this sign as a Christianized version of the Dionysus myth or of related stories have largely been abandoned in the light of evidence that the alleged parallels are wholly inadequate. Zeitgeist's source for these titles of Dionysus, Acharya S., only says he was considered the only begotten son, Alpha and Omega, etc., not that he actually was known by these titles. She has absolutely no source for the title King of Kings, which is a generic term in the first place, and secondly does not even suit Dionysus, since Zeus was the head god according to mythology. Nor does the title Only Begotten Son suit Dionysus, since Zeus had several offspring including Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Hermes, Persephone, Dionysus, Perseus, Heracles, Helen, Minos, and Muses. James Fraser, author of The Golden Bough, is cited in Zeitgeist for this claim of the resurrection. With such an array of options, it may be no surprise that at least one variation bears a superficial resemblance to what happened to Jesus. Still, this vague description does not match with the Jewish concept of resurrection.
You're going to have to give me a date for the earliest inscription, because Dionysus, I don't know anybody who thinks Dionysus is pre-Christian, not the resurrection portion.
Okay, well, all I can tell you is that the myth is that he is torn apart by the Titans, eaten, and he is raised from the dead.
But what is the date?
I don't know the date of the, as I said, of the original, as far as any writings we have. But I know that with the myths, the Greek myths, most of our Greek myths, we do have from later collections, except we know they are from They were told earlier because we have the vase paintings depicting them going way back in time.
But the question is there a resurrection? And since we don't have any resurrection predating the 2nd century all the way to the 4th century, are the earliest ones, 2nd to 4th, we can say, well, maybe there's a resurrection there, but there's no data.
Even Tim Callahan, the skeptic you just saw defending Dionysus, admits there is no crucifixion. Even the skeptic Tim Callahan critiques the movie Zeitgeits, saying, "Perhaps the worst aspect of Part 1 of Peter Joseph's internet film Zeitgeist is that some of what it asserts is true. Unfortunately, this material is liberally and sloppily mixed with material that is only partially true, and much that is plainly and simply bogus. The evidence for Jesus as a real historical personage, though meager, is solid." Mithra is the only one of these pagan gods mentioned that could have conceivably come in contact with Christianity. As the late Dr. Ronald Nash puts it, Mithra was supposedly born when he emerged from a rock. Unless this rock was a virgin, there is no virgin birth for Mithra. For the last time, December 25th is irrelevant to origins. The claim of Mithra having 12 disciples comes from Zeitgeist sources, Acharya S., Timothy Freak, and Peter Gandy, yet there is no documentation for this claim in their books. Acharya S., Timothy Freak, and Peter Gandy now acknowledge that they got this idea of 12 disciples from a scene where Mithra is framed by 2 vertical rows of 6 pictures of what seems to be human figures and Mithra in the middle. The reliefs come from the 2nd century AD. Even if these reliefs were dated prior to Christianity, the Iranian Mithras had a single companion and the Roman Mithra had 2 helpers, which were tiny torch-bearing likenesses of Mithra himself. Mithra also had a number of animal companions, a snake, a dog, a lion, a scorpion, but not 12 of them. Mithra did perform a number of actions rather typical for any deity worldwide, true or false, and in both his Iranian and Roman incarnations. It must be remembered, however, that some general similarities would normally apply to any religious leader. However, these are not objects that require some theory of dependence. Besides, the mysteries were not practiced until the 1st century AD, and Mithraism reached the height of its popularity around the 3rd and 4th centuries, when it was particularly popular among the soldiers of the Roman Empire, but that rules out the possibility of influence on Christianity. In his book, Image and Value in the Greco-Roman World, Richard Gordon writes that there is no death of Mithras, and thus there is no resurrection of Mithra, nor is there a 3-day burial. Zeitgeist sources, Freak and Gandy, claim that the Mithraic initiates enacted a similar resurrection scene, but their only reference is post-Christian Tertullian's Prescription Against Heretics, chapter 40, which is also quoted in the Zeitgeist addendum. In context, this in no way proves Zeitgeist's point, because Tertullian was explaining how Mithraic practices, which were introduced into Roman culture after Christianity, copied Christianity. Mithraic practices were not even in existence in the 1st century when Christianity began, but they were beginning to emerge in Tertullian's time and apparently copying Christian and Jewish beliefs. The complete passage reads, "The devil, of course, to whom pertain these wiles which pervert the truth, and who by the mystic rites of his idols vies even with the essential portions of the sacraments of God, he too baptizes some. That is, his own believers and faithful followers he promises the putting away of sins by a layer of his own. And, if my memory still serves me, Mithra there, in the kingdom of Satan, sets his mark on the foreheads of his soldiers, celebrates also the oblation of bread, and introduces an image of a resurrection. Therefore, in the very source cited by Zeitgeist and Freak and Gandy, Mithra celebrates and introduces an image of a resurrection, which can hardly be seen as a resurrection of Mithra, or for Mithraic initiates. Additionally, Tertullian's writing is significantly after the New Testament times. Dr. Ronald Nash affirms, "No claim can be made that Mithras was a dying and rising god. The tide of scholarly opinion has turned dramatically against attempts to make early Christianity dependent on the so-called dying and rising gods of Hellenistic paganism. Any unbiased examination of the evidence shows that such claims must be rejected. Sunday worship only appears in Roman Mithraism. and Acharya S. is apparently assuming that what held true for Roman Mithraism also held true for the Iranian Mithraism, but there is no evidence for this idea. It is therefore unlikely that borrowing occurred, but if there was borrowing, it was the other way around. Though the Bible teaches that Jesus rose from the dead on Sunday, and early Christians considered this the Lord's Day, they not only worshipped him on this day of the week, but every other day as well, as we read in Acts chapter 2, 46 and 47. And the Jews, such as Jesus, worshipped on the Sabbath, or Saturday. In the early 4th century, it was Constantine of the Roman Catholic Church who paganized the meaning of Sunday. His Sunday law of March 7th, AD 321 read, "On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and people residing in the cities rest, and let all workshops be closed." Mithraism could not have influenced the gospel writers because it was not even known to the Roman world at the time of early Christianity. The Encyclopedia Britannica states, "There is little notice of the Persian god Mithra in the Roman world until the beginning of the 2nd century, but from the year AD 136 onward, there are hundreds of dedicatory inscriptions to Mithra. Roman Mithraism was practically a new creation, wrought by a religious genius who may have lived as late as AD 100. We must assume that the pagan gods which Zeitgeits gives examples for are the ones for which they have the best documentation and evidence. As the viewer has seen, the examples given by Zeitgeist are not impressive. Taken together with all the debunked information, the parallels Zeitgeist presented in no way explains causation for Christianity. Before AD 100, all of the mystery religions were still mostly confined to localities. But after AD 100, they gradually began to attain popularity throughout the Roman Empire. Many writers used the late source material produced in this period after AD 150 to form reconstructions of what they think the cults must have been earlier to their spread in the Roman Empire. All of these sources and authors cited for these claims in the film Zeitgeist are not original primary sources, nor do they cite such primary or original material in their bibliographies. Even the majority of atheists and non-Christian scholars have rejected the idea that Christianity has been borrowed from ancient myths, including the well-respected Sir Edward Evans Pritchard, who wrote, "The evidence for this theory is negligible."